I used to think storms were the kind of honesty you could trust. Wind doesn't lie, it breaks or it passes. Waves don't pretend. They come, they take, they leave. That was before the night we came back to the coast house after the big one. And I learned how quietly a life can tilt, even after the windows stop rattling. My wife's name is Ada. We bought the place in late September when the real estate photos still had the light of a good lie. The listing called it a salt box with character. What it meant was a slant, a smell, a promise. The roof scalloped, the porch tilted, the kitchen leaned toward the sea like it wanted to hear gossip. I told Ada it was a project, and I meant it like a vow. She said, "It feels like a beginning." And I believed her because beginnings wear people's faces better than endings do. We spent the first 2 weeks pretending the ocean was a soundtrack and not a neighbor. By the third, the storm had a name. You don't worry about storms with no names. You respect the ones that get called like people. Ours arrived from the southeast, slow and offended, with a shoulder that wouldn't quit. The day before it hit, we taped X's on the windows that already knew about force. I flew outside to tie down the kayaks. Ada emptied the bottom drawers and set the photos higher. We went to bed with the power blinking like someone who wanted to keep talking and wasn't sure how. The storm lifted the house by its ribs and set it down different. In the morning, the world looked blurred. Sand across asphalt. A fence depressed into the shape of a thought. The porch rail missing like a tooth. We walked through rooms we recognized only by their angles, saying the names of objects to remind ourselves the nouns still belonged to us. Later, we would learn the best way to measure the storm's damage was by smell. Mildew in the closet, iodine in the kitchen, tar where the roof had complained, a new sweetness in the bedroom that did not belong to any branch of our life. We had no power. The old generator in the shed coughed to life on the third pull, then remembered its purpose with a patient thrum. I set up extension cords like veins. Ada brewed coffee on a camp stove and poured it into the mug with the chip I always forget is there. We stood at the kitchen window watching the tide throw back things it didn't want. Rope, a red bucket, something with a sail that didn't know it used to be part of something bigger. I saw the dent in the pantry wall when I went looking for a can opener. It was a hand's width, subtle, the kind of bruise a house gets when time presses on it. I pressed back absently and felt the cheap plywood shift against the space behind it. It wasn't a full false panel, just a board that was less committed than its neighbors. "Ada," I called. She didn't answer. A minute later, I heard her on the porch, sweeping fragments of our rail into piles that looked like punctuation. Behind the loose board, I found a tin box. It wasn't romantic, no ornate etchings, no velvet, just a tackle tin with a dent and a sticker you could only read if you loved faded ink. Inside, a handful of Polaroids, a paper map of the harbor with circles drawn in grease pencil, and a narrow logbook with pages that had learned the ocean's alphabet salt, warp, soften. The Polaroids were small and square. In one, a woman stood on the jetty in a raincoat that had lost its shine, head thrown back like she was listening to gulls tell a joke. In another, a picnic on the hood of a truck with someone's knee cut out of the frame. The logbook had lines, dates, times, initials, weights. Some entries had a single word, jar, cairn, blue. The map had 3 circles offshore, close enough to wade at a low tide that liked you. Next to each, a time window in pencil. Dusk, before dawn, Thursday last quarter. The generator sputtered, caught itself. Ada stepped in, hair pulled into a knot that didn't include any order. "Supplies?" she asked, then saw the tin, stopped, balanced the broom against her leg, and pressed 2 fingers to the box without touching it. She said too quickly, "Old owners, fishermen." "Fishermen log weights," I said, leafing the pages carefully. "They don't circle rocks and write down windows like an appointment." She offered a small smile without teeth. "Maybe they created treasure hunts for kids. Kids don't draw grease pencil like a surveyor." She touched the edge of a Polaroid with the care you give a sleeping thing. "We should get the rail fixed before the inspector comes," she said, already pivoting toward practical. That afternoon, a neighbor appeared like people do after storms, sheepish, helpful, wearing the face of a person who wants to check on you and also on their version of you. His name was Ethan, a carpenter with a ladder and a voice like boards meeting properly. He kept his hands in his jacket when he talked, a habit that read as gentleness if you wanted it to. He set the ladder without instructions and replaced the missing rail with a temporary brace. He looked out at the water, whistled a single thin note between his teeth, and said, "The flats will be good tonight." "For what?" I asked. "Secrets," he said, and made it sound like a craft. They talked. Not long. Not the way you remember if it matters. He asked if we needed help with the basement door. It had swollen in its frame. Ada said yes with that small exhale that means, "Please do." And he did. And the door remembered how to be a door. When he left, he touched the brim of a cap he wasn't wearing, a joke he must have inherited from someone else's father. That night we ate by lantern, the table's shadow stretching back like another couple waiting to be served. The power's absence made the air louder. We went to bed early because there are not many activities in a storm-dark house that don't admit their purpose out loud. I woke to find Ada's side of the bed cool. I figured the bathroom, the fridge, the generator. The old place has a lot of reasons to stand up for a minute and listen to a motor thrum. Then I heard the back door open with that soft apology old hinges learn. I got up, avoided the boards that squeak, and looked through the kitchen window. The tide had fallen back like breath. The flats shone. Ada walked toward the jetty in her raincoat, flashlight low, hood up, moving fast like she knew where the ground would change its mind. I should have called. I should have knocked glass. Instead, I dressed quick and followed until the wind did my breathing for me. On the jetty, the rocks kept their slippery truth. Beyond, the water rhymed the harbor's throat in a wet, pale V. The circles on the map weren't compass fantasies. They were humped stones poking out like the backs of whales. Ada did not go to the first one. She went to the second, the one the map had called blue. She knelt with deliberation, wrapped her hand around a rock you would ignore in daylight, and lifted. Beneath, a glass jar the size of a small hope, wrapped in net, heavy with something dark. She untied the net, unscrewed the lid, and slid out a roll of paper. Her flashlight found the face of it like recognition. I didn't move. My feet had learned doom's etiquette. She didn't read the note like you read strangers. She read it the way you check a memory for error, and her shoulders recognized whatever they found. She slid the paper back in, tightened the lid, and tucked the jar into her coat. You make a million small decisions standing on a jetty. I stepped on the wrong rock. It clacked against its neighbor with a sound that came from every childhood game of hide-and-seek you ever played. Ada's light swung toward me, away, returned. She saw me. We were made of the same wet dark. She didn't run. She didn't speak. She waited like we were in a line for something that would at last call our number. "What is it?" I asked, voice already tasting salt. "A mercy," she said, "or a debt. I can't tell which." We walked back with the jar between us like an ugly baby we loved or feared. In the kitchen, I set it on the table and turned up the lantern. The glass had a seam. The lid was new. The paper inside was clean, except where the edges had learned satiety. When she unscrewed the lid again, I expected a lover's handwriting, a map, an instruction. What I got was mine. Not my exact letters. My words. Whole sentences I had sent Ada in the year we were engaged, written in the stupid grace of someone who loves poems when life can afford them. I recognized the dumb jokes about fruit at the farmer's market, and the line about waking up to her throat, and the plan for driving to the desert in a rental with bad shocks. It was my voice without time on it. It was a chorus of things I had meant. "Where did you get this?" I said. "And how did you make it look like a message in a bottle if this is my text from 7 years ago?" She pressed the heel of her hand to her forehead like the world had stamped a visa there. "There's a group," she said. "They're called Binders' Wives. It's been around here forever. People put promises in jars, not new ones, old ones. The kind that can still be true if you set them afloat and then fetch them later and decide you mean them again. And sometimes," she swallowed, "sometimes they are other people's." "How do you get other people's promises?" "Storms," she said. "They move the stones. They leave the wrong jars visible. People say it's random. It never is. The ocean knows who is starving. You took our words out of the water." I tried to smile and failed. "So we could eat." "It was mine," she said. Yours to me. And there are more. Not just yours. Other people's vows. Other people's lies they told generously at Christmas. The Birches put theirs by the old piling and never go fetch them. Ethan, she stopped and started again. The carpenter, he told me where to find them. He said after the storm, the map resets. Ethan's in the group. They all are, she said. Everyone who pretends tide charts are just numbers. What did you fetch for him? I heard the sentence before I could filter it. She stared at me in that careful way that falls between pity and courage. He hasn't asked me to fetch anything, she said. He knows where his jars are. He gave me the map because he thought if I read our old words, I'd stop trying to borrow other people's. What other people's have you borrowed? I asked, almost gently. 4, she said. The truth a stone dropped from a small height. 1 from a woman who said she would never raise her voice again. 1 from a man who promised to tell his brother the diagnosis before it got bad. 1 that was just a recipe for pie, with a line at the end that said, "Do not forget to kiss her before the timer." And 1 that wasn't vows at all. It was a schedule. Thursday nights, 1900. Dock light off. She traced the seam of the glass. I put that one back where I found it. Sometimes a lesson is to leave things. Whose was that? She shook her head, a refusal dressed as ignorance. It wasn't name-marked. None of them are. The ocean doesn't care about credit. Did you meet someone on the dock? I asked, low like the question was a trespass. With the light off? The generator filled the room with its stubborn brrr. The lantern hummed. In the space between those small motors, I heard the true engine. Her breath. No, she said. I did not meet a person. I met the shape that kind of sentence makes inside you. The one that wants something to be secret so it can feel important. And I walked home. Alone? Yes. I wanted to believe her. I also wanted to ask the kind of question you can only ask if you want to lose. Instead, I ran my finger over my own old words like I could sand the earnestness into courage. Why bring this one home, I asked, and not the others? I needed to know if you still meant them, she said. And if I did. You could ask. I could, she said, and her mouth faltered into the shape of apology. But people who are afraid of answers go to the water first and ask for a miracle that looks like a sign. I needed to embarrass myself with proof before I came to the table like a person. We put the jar on the shelf by the stove, next to the dumb salt pig and the dripper that makes terrifying coffee. We slept badly. In the morning, the sky wore the clear meanness that comes after storms, the light like something you could trip over. Ethan came by mid-morning with a real rail and a bag of screws. He said good, gentle things about the way the house had held up. He lifted the jar without reading it and said, "Ah," like the sound a person makes when the answer arrives, exactly as simple as it should be. He set it down exactly where it had been, quarter turned, like the chin of a portrait. "Did you ever fetch one not yours?" I asked him. He looked at me and took the measure of my tone the way carpenters measure the pitch of a roof. "Once," he said, 4 summers ago. I left it on my counter for a month. It made a sound when I walked by like a bell only I could hear. Finally put it back. Some loves you can't adopt. Do you tell people where the circles are on the map? Sometimes, he said, if the storm has already told them something unforgivable. Why us? I meant it a little like an accusation and a little like thank you. He set the rail, drove screws, leaned his weight to test mine. Because you bought the house that leaks at exactly the joint honest people do, he said. And because your wife looks like someone who will keep what she takes, which is the only kind of thief the sea respects. When he left, Ada said, I didn't ask him to say any of that. And I said I knew, and I did, in the sour way you know things you don't like. We kept the jar. For a week, we read 1 line a night. The first, I will take the slow road if it keeps your hand in mine. The second, I will not call work more urgent than you. The third, when the roof leaks and it will, let's put out pots and pretend it's a new instrument and laugh until we fix it. We laughed with our mouths. We bought sealant. We still went to our phones when the quiet got bigger than our courage. On Thursday, I came home to find the jar gone. There was a note on the table in Ada's sloped hand. Low tide makes everyone brave. Don't wait for me. Or do. I did not wait. I went to the jetty under a sky that knew too much about distance. Half the town was out in the quiet way. People are when they pretend not to share a ritual. The circles on the flats had small knots of figures at them, 3 at one rock, 2 at another, a single person at the far circle who kept stopping as if the ground kept telling them a story out of order. Ada stood where she had stood before, at blue with the jar against her ribs, like a child deciding whether to go down the slide. Ethan stood a little way off, close enough to be accused of help if you wanted to push it. I came to her side and did not say hello. She unscrewed the lid and pulled our words out and read the final line again, the one that had made me ache like good bread. If you forget, I'll remind you. If I forget, remind me. We only owe the sea what we cannot say. She rolled the page, slid it back into glass, tightened the lid until it squeaked, then knelt and pushed the jar under the rock. She wasn't gentle. She shoved like a person tired of petitions. She stood, wiped her hands on her coat and said, "To me or the water? Okay." Ethan nodded once and turned away with the good manners of a man who knows when to pretend he hasn't heard something beautiful. We walked back without touching. In the kitchen, she said, "I didn't bring it home to ask you a question you could fail. I brought it home to remember that you already answered it once. I put it back because I want to answer it now without anyone grading me." "What is the question?" "Do you still love me?" she said. The most arrogant and humble thing we ask. I said yes, too quickly, like someone who wants extra credit. Then I took her hand and said yes slower, and we leaned against the stove because we both needed something that would hold heat when the next sentence came. "Did you ever read a jar that wasn't ours and like it more than ours?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Once." It said, "I promised to stop saving my best sentences for strangers." I felt like a thief just looking at it. I wanted to steal the person who wrote it. "Do you know who did?" "No," she said, "but I stopped writing stories to the person who might have." "You mean me," I said, and I didn't. "Not exactly. I mean anyone who isn't the person who lives in my house," she said, "which includes you lately, because you've been living in whatever room your phone is in." "I have," I said. We made a rule that sounded childish and then didn't. No more jars we didn't place. If we needed vows, we'd draft them with our hands visible and our mouths unheroic, and we'd store them where mice can get them so we'd be forced to read them often. For 2 weeks, we were the kind of couple you would trust with keys. We ate dinner at the table, not in the howl of the TV. We fixed the hinge that had been threatening to leave the pantry for its true home in the junk drawer. We sat on the porch in wool blankets and named boats like astronomers. The wishing chair, forgive us, we're new, return policy. We joined town repair days and hammered boards on other people's porches. Ethan taught me to set a nail without denting the wood. I taught him nothing he didn't already know about grace. Then the small storm came, the kind with no name that still claims its inches. The sea pushed its shoulder into the flats and rearranged the map. In the morning, someone had placed a jar on our porch rail. No net, no rock, just glass beaded with salt. Under the lid, a folded paper, blue from ink, bleeding under wet, marked with a single diagonal stroke I knew better than my own signature. Ada's. My mouth dried. The generator had been off for days, but I swear I heard it start. She came out in her sweater, took one look at the jar and me beside it, and closed her eyes like she was praying or bracing. "I didn't put that there," she said. "How can you tell?" I meant it crueler than I intended, and I heard my tone coming back to me like a slap. "Because if I had, I would leave it under a rock where the ocean could arbitrate," she said. I twisted the lid and felt the pressure of air that wanted to stay. The paper unrolled with reluctance. The first line had Ada's hand for sure. The pressure at the downstrokes, the impatient comma. It said, "I intend," and then stopped, as if the page had been torn from something larger. On the back, 2 names. One was mine. The other was not. Not Ethan. A woman's. The paper came from the Historical Society's donation drive tiny logo in the corner, so old enough to belong to anybody and young enough to be deliberately chosen. "Ada," I said. She stared at the river like it deserved to be a person. "I wrote an intention worksheet with the women's group in March," she said. "Back when I was trying not to take the job here, because it felt like a hobby we could not afford. It asked us to write the names of people who anchor us and the ones who blow wind under us, and the ones who rock us until we want to vomit. I put yours under anchor. I put my sister's under wind, because she makes me do the thing and not just plan it. The paper wasn't in a jar. It was in a notebook that lived in my purse, and my purse lived in a house that was open during the storm because my hands forgot to lock what they should. Someone put this in glass to tell a story about me that works better than the truth. Who? I asked, but the question had the naive sound of a child who thinks witchcraft has a culprit. Ethan stepped onto the porch with a face that had decided to be useful. He had a jar under his arm and a towel around his hand that looked like it had bled. Found this at the jetty, he said. It's not mine, and it's not the sea's. Someone smashed the lid and put a new one on to make it look like it had history. It's got your street written on the net. We slid the towel off. The glass was cracked in a star under a new lid. Inside, a scrap from an old ledger. It said, Thermasserie 19 were dock light off. The handwriting wasn't Ada's or mine. The corner had been singed on purpose. The net had a tag from a hardware store that died before I was born. Ethan looked at me like a person choosing how much truth to deliver without blowing off fingers. There's someone in this town who likes to make dramas out of other people's low tides, he said. They think they're teaching lessons. They've ruined 4 marriages by making them go faster toward whatever end they were already sprinting at. Who? I said again, because sometimes dignity is a luxury. Doesn't matter, he said. It only works if you think the ocean is more magical than your mouth. Ada picked up the first jar, held it with a steadiness that made me wish for any other kind of wife or any other kind of man. Do you believe me? She asked. About the intention sheet, about the dock light, about not meeting anyone, about not turning our house into a hallway between other people's rooms. I wanted to make a ceremony of thinking. I wanted to measure the sentences and cross-reference the nights and hire a curator for my faith. But storms do their best work in the tiny window before you decide you should get your shoes. Yes, I said. My body said it before my brain found proof. I was either telling the truth of who I am or a story about who I want to be for her. Sometimes the difference is only the length of time you hold the yes. We returned both jars to the water that night, not to hide them, not to make them sacred, but because we didn't want to curate our own museum of rehearsal hurts. We wrote our own new lines on notebook paper that made ink look cheap and that felt exactly right. We didn't roll them. We didn't burn their edges. We put them on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sardine. Her line was, I will tell you the ugly version first. Mine was, I will not delegate intimacy to artifacts. We ate pasta that tasted like the end of something and the beginning of something else that you don't get to name until it doesn't break you. The next morning, the inspector came to check the power lines to our breaker and the way the neighbor's pine had decided to flirt with our roof. He had a clipboard and a sense of humor that belonged to a kinder decade. He stamped something and told us we could go back to regular electricity the following day if the crew got the pole upright. He said, Storm got you good. And I said, not as good as we got ourselves. And he chuckled like he'd heard that one before. Ada went back to her job inventorying donations the old family sent. Quilts that told stories no one asked the right questions about. Ledgers that hid crimes in neat short columns. Portraits painted to think they were benevolent. I fixed the hinge on the bathroom window and oiled the door and felt good about small resistances. Ethan rebuilt the rail properly and refused money. He left us a note that said, Tide knows your address. Only open the door when you invite it, which is either carpenter wisdom or religion. Time passed the way it passes, impressively ordinary. We walked at low water without hunting. We watched other people kneel by rocks and chose not to guess. We made dinner on weekdays and breakfast on weekends, and sometimes we reversed that just to remember we could. We got texts from town with photos. Someone else's jar with someone else's handwriting causing someone else's thunder. We stayed still. One night in November, long after the storm had become a character in a story and not the plot, the house woke us with a sound I didn't know it knew. Not wind, not pipe, not the nails shifting in their loyalties. It was a bell, a small one, insistent, asking to be included. We got up and followed it to the pantry wall where the tin had first slept. The board had loosened again in the swell from a smaller storm. Behind it, where the tackle box had been, was a new jar. Not glass, ceramic, old. The lid waxed with a ring of red like a seal. On the body, pressed before firing, a line. Keep only what you can carry. Inside, something rattled. We stared at each other in the idiotic superstition of joint lives. Ada lifted it like a person brave enough to deserve what she gets. We broke the wax, and the lid gave with a breath. Inside, two things. A brass key with a curve like a note sung wrong, and a folded paper with the Historical Society's logo. Ada opened it. My name in her hand, dated the day we found the first tin. And a line I hadn't heard out loud yet. I will not use the sea to speak for me. Under it, a second line in my hand, written today, I will not use silence to punish you. We looked at each other over the mouth of the jar, the kind of look you don't get to orchestrate. I said, did you put this in here? She said, did you? We both knew the answer because the handwriting wasn't new, but the ink was, and there was no reasonable explanation beyond the simple one. We had already been telling each other these things in ugly ways. Now the house wanted them labeled. We hung the key by the door where the rail meets the frame. It opened nothing. It reminded everything. Sometimes at low tide we still walk out to the circles and look at the rocks the way you look at an old school where you learn both math and cruelty. People ask if we throw notes anymore. We don't. We write them. We post them on the fridge like unheroic people do, and we move them when we stop needing them. Guests think it's quaint. I hope they steal the idea. If you need a villain, I can offer you the storm or the neighbor who gossips in the kind register that kills. If you want an affair, I can give you 1,000 small ones. The way I checked my phone when our dinner was a vow. The way she swallowed hard and let the water speak for her because water forgives more quickly. The person who broke the jars to make lies look true never signed their work. The town mostly knows. The town mostly forgives. The sea will keep teaching. Last week, winter arrived properly. The windows filmed and the gulls argued like old married couples who still cross the street to avoid crossing a line. Ada put out bowls to catch the leak above the pantry, and when the water hit the pot, it made the same bell ding, and we laughed like we had invented the joke. Later, we lay in bed and listened to the house remember every storm it had known before us. I placed my hand on the place where her hairline meets her temple and asked the smallest question there is, the one that keeps a life above water. Is this for us? Yes, she said, and then, as if the room had asked for a tip, and if it ever isn't, I'll say so where you can hear it. Not out there, where rocks pretend to make choices. The generator sits quiet in the shed again, full of fuel we might need and might never. The pantry board holds until humidity decides. The key by the door still opens nothing, and we still touch it on the way out and in. Sometimes when the night is windless and the tide is balanced like a breath you don't know whether to hold or release, I swear I can hear glass tapping glass beneath the jetty stones, the old jars winking. They don't call, they don't accuse, they remind. And I remind myself that the only promise the sea deserves from me is to stop asking it to say what I should have said at the table, while the coffee was still warm and the house still smelled like the beginning we paid for. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. It means a lot. New stories like this one are posted every single day, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one. And if this story touched you, please give it a like. It really helps more people find our content.